Hello everyone, Andrew here from 369 Game Design. Today I'm going to continue with my Devlog journey for a 3D Endless Runner game. Specifically today I'm going to be walking through the platform creation, pooling a system for the platform pieces to keep the memory usage down, as when you allocate a resource into the game world and deallocate it, memory is utilized. The pooling system helps to keep that memory usage down and prevents any slowness on the devices. If you like the content, please subscribe, get notified of new content, and send me some comments. So before I begin creating the platform and the pooling system, the first thing I want to do is just create a few directory structures for myself so I can actually sort things out according to the way I like it. So the first directory I want to create is in the assets folder directly called Endless Runner, where I'm going to contain all my information for my game itself. It just prevents, if you're importing an asset from some location, it doesn't overwrite anything that you've currently created. It just keeps things neat according to the way I like to do things. As well, I'm going to create a folder called temp under the assets directory so that I can actually have temporary stuff that I'm working with that I know that at the end of the day I can actually delete with no issues. In the Endless Runner directory structure, I'm going to create my materials folder. I'm also going to create my prefabs folder, my scenes folder as well, and my scripts folder, where I'm going to be containing all my scripts that are going to be part of the game. From here, I'm going to create myself a new scene, and save it as a game scene in my new scenes created folder. So to start creating the platform pieces, I found this great asset on the Unity store called Grass Road Race, and it has virtually everything I need in order to do a template of what I would like to get done. So in order to install this in my project, I would go to Window Package Manager, select my assets as the list that I would like to utilize, and search for the package that I would like to import. So as can be seen, this is the one I would like to import. I click the import button, and as you can see, it's going to import into the subfolder Grass Road Race. So that's pretty nice. It's actually contained in its own folder structure and it's not going to collide with anything else that I've created in my game so far. So I'm going to import the asset. Once the asset has been imported, you can close the package manager. And if you go down to the Grass Road Race, you can see that the data has been imported with materials, prefabs, and scripts. Important thing to look at, if you go to, for example, the materials for the text of the ground, you'll see that it's got this bright pink structure, which is not actually working correctly the way we would like it. It should have some decent material. This is because we're using the universal render pipeline, and in order to resolve this, you would go to Edit, the render pipeline, universal render pipeline, and upgrade the project materials to the universal render pipeline. And once it's gone through, you'll see that the material has been converted successfully and available for use with the universal render pipeline. So before we start putting the Levelmanager together along with the associated scripts, I just wanted to show you in operation so you get an understanding of how it works and what all the different scripts do and how they link in together. For example, when we look at the Levelmanager has two elements, level segments, so element 0 and element 1, which are just two prefabs, which are the actual platform pieces that are being brought into the game world as needed and taken out of the game world. And then I have two transition pieces as well that can also get brought in and get taken out as need be. The reason for the transition, it's a bit of a breather for the character. He's gone through a difficult stage, he gets a small platform piece where he can actually take a breath, and he goes back into the game again. How this actually works is actually the spear that we've got running down the path at the moment is moving down. It has this return to pull tag. It's actually colliding with a trigger on each one of the platform pieces. As it passes through the trigger, the platform piece gets told you're no longer needed and can get recycled back into the pool. So let's see how this actually works. So to begin, in the endless runner scripts directory, create a new subfolder called level, which will hold everything related to the level for the scripts, and then create another one called player. Anything related to the player will be contained within that directory structure as well. In the player structure, create a new C# script called return to pull tag. This will be associated with the player and will collide with the trigger until the platform piece that it needs to go back into the pool. So when we open up the return to pull tag, opens up in Visual Studio, my editor of choice, and as can be seen, it comes with a standard Unity template. I'm going to replace this with code that I've pre-written, and we'll step through it accordingly. In the script, I don't require the void start nor the void update, so I'm going to be deleting them and replacing them with non-collision enter function instead. What this does is collides with the trigger that has been set on the platform piece, gives a quick debug, and signifies the platform piece that should actually return back into the pool. The next script we need to create is the object destroy script. So you go back to the scripts folder structure, select level, and in the level folder, create a C# script called object destroy. Open that up in your editor. For the object destroy script, I don't need the void update nor the void start. I'm going to delete it and replace it with the pre-created code that I have. Walking through it is a serialized field that we can edit from the inspector of the game object. It's just a delay that we can actually specify how long to wait before the platform actually gets put back into the pool. There's a definition for a trigger event, which we'll go through in a minute. A public void on trigger exit, which basically says if the object that I'm colliding with has a return to pool tag, then it must run the start coroutine called wait and deactivate. What this basically does is it will wait for however long I've delayed, 10 seconds, run the onLevel exited function, which is contained within the Levelmanager script, and then set the game object piece that I collided with into a false state, which then allows it to be called from the Levelmanager process again. The last script we're going to be creating to get the Levelmanager working is the Levelmanager script. So in the scripts level directory, create a new C# script called Levelmanager. And then open it up in your editor. After opening the Levelmanager script, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of my two update and start functions and replace the code with the code that I've written previously. A lot of it's basically self-explanatory. I'm just going to go through the key points. So the void on enable sets up the events trigger so that when the object destroy script kicks in and sends an event to the Levelmanager script, it knows what process function to run. On the disable of the Levelmanager script, it actually takes it out of the system and reduces the memory locations as well. Initializing some basic variables, it's just a randomization function that I've put in place, but I'll go through that in a few minutes. So the way the platforming is set up, I've got two sections that I actually have. One is the track pieces, and the other one is the transition pieces, and they basically generally work the same way. So to start off with the track pieces easy, I create a new list of game objects, and then for every item in the track pool amount that I specified above, I make sure that it's not the same track that I chose previously. If it's not, then I create a game object, instantiate it into the level segments as the variable, as a game object, and I set it to false if it's not automatically game enabled, and then I add it into the list so that we be able to reference it. Transition pieces work in the same way, and the idea that I had was that for every section of the track, every 10 times that there's a level piece, you give the player a transition piece that gives them a few minutes just to grab his breath and be able to continue with that. So also in the start function, create the initial segments and place them into the world so that we actually have them kicking in when the player is ready to start. So I initially start off with initial amount of segments, and I create transition pieces. So I say that I want 2 transition pieces before I actually start creating track segments. So it actually gives the runner the ability to start running down the track, and then obstacles start appearing and comes from there. And then of course I reset the track piece counter to 0 so that I can keep track of it later. So looking at the create segment function, as it goes through, it will check for every piece in the count of the list. If it's not active in the hierarchy, in other words, it's not active in the game world, I would then give it a new spawn origin, working out how far I am down the track length, and then spawn it into that position, and then set it active to be true, so that it will appear in the game world and the player can actually run on it. Once I find a piece to actually utilize, I break out of the for loop, as there's no need to go forward from there. If I need to create a transition piece, it does exactly the same thing. It increases the track piece count, see how many pieces there are in the track piece count list. If it's not active in the hierarchy, find a new spawn point for it, spawn it into the game world, enable it, and then break out of the for loop. When the event trigger comes forward, being called from the object destroy script, it checks to make sure if the track piece is equal to 10, then create my transition piece and then reset the counter back to 0. So every 10th track piece will then become a transitional segment. Otherwise, create the segment and continue from there. Back in Unity Editor, we need to get some ground objects for the character to actually run across. So we go to the Grass Road Race prefabs folder, select ground 01, and drag that into the game scene. It'll be displayed as below, as you can see, rather. We're going to reset the positions on the transform by clicking the reset button to actually put it back into 0, 0, 0, so it's in the center of the ground of the game world. Select ground 01, press F, and it'll be displayed in the game view. Because I want to modify it and create my own prefabs, etc., I'm going to unpack it. So you get a prefab, unpack completely, so I can actually modify it, do what I want with it, and not affect the original game object. At this moment, the prefab has been created in our scene, but for me, the materials are still in the Grass Road Race material structure. So what I want to do is, in my endless run of materials folder, I'm going to create a new subfolder called Platforms, where I'm going to store the materials that are related to platforms. So we go to the Grass Road Race materials folder, find the materials for the text fence, the text ground that I currently need at this moment in time, and click and drag them into the correct folder. So that means when I eventually come around and delete the Grass Road Race subfolder, I will not be losing my materials as I proceed from there. So ground 01 has got a fence and a ground at the moment. I want to create a larger area for the player to run on. So I'm going to click on ground. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to change its Z position to be 7.6 in the Z direction, so that it actually gives me a bit of a larger area of ground to actually run on. So the next thing I'm going to do is just change the scale from 1 to 2 on all its axes, just to make it a little bit bigger for me when I run through in the game world. For the moment, I'm going to rename this game object to something more logical for me. I'm calling it level 1 easy 1, as it would be the first track piece in the level 1 environment. Need to make it a prefab now, so in my assets in this run of prefabs folder, I'm going to create a subfolder called level 1 and then drag level 1 easy 1 into that environment. So that we have this as a prefab, it can be instantiated at any point in time. I need a few more of these, so I'm going to create, unpack it again, prefab unpack completely, rename it to be level 1 easy 2, drag that into the level 1 folder, and then I also need some transition pieces. So the prefab unpack it completely and rename it to be level 1 transition 1, create that into a prefab as well, and the last one that we need is level 1 transition 2, and then we drag that into the level 1. So at this moment in time, we have 2 track pieces and 2 transition pieces, and yes, they all look the same at the moment, but later on we'll be adding obstacles and other relevant information into it. This is purely for testing to ensure that our pooling system and our platform generation is working successfully. With all the prefabs done and all the scripting done, we're now ready to put things together. So let's get rid of any other objects we don't need in the scene board at the moment by selecting level 1 transition 2, our last one that we created, and deleting that. We need a game object with a script associated with it to manage our scene and settings specifically for the level management. So we're going to go forward, create an empty game object and call it level manager. And again, we set all our transform positions to be 0. Next step would be to associate the level manager script with the level manager game object. So we'd go to our scripts folder, our level, grab the level manager script and drag it onto the level manager. As can be seen, our checkboard amount is set at 25, our transition pieces is set at 6, and our current count is set to 0. And as you can see, there's level segments and transition segments which we now need to populate. So I know that I have 2 level segments and 2 transition segments that I can associate with the level manager. So let's forward the details for the level segments in first. So I go to my prefabs, level 1 environment, take level 1 easy prefab and drag it into element 0, level 1 easy 2 and drag it into element 1, and do the same for the transition pieces, element 0 for transition piece 1, element 1 for transition piece 2. And at this moment in time, if we were to play the game, we will see that the track has been created. And if you look in the scene view, you'll see that it's pre-created a whole lot of different track pieces going forward. And if you look in the game scene, you can see that it's got the 1, 2, 1, 2. So the randomization that I put in place is actually working. These are the active objects and the inactive objects going forward for the end of the level pieces. And you can see the same with the transition pieces 1 and 2 and the spare ones going from there. At this moment in time, nothing else will happen. We can't actually see anything that's going forward. So what we need to do now is just create a basic sphere that will move across the track and actually see it working in progress. You can actually see it going forward and working. So let's create a basic character of a sphere object. So in the game scene, go to create a menu and create a basic sphere item. You can leave it as sphere for the moment, but let's reset its positions to be 0 so we know where it is in the world. Again, focus in on it and we can actually see it going from there. We need to just have this sphere move down the track in a consistent pace. So the first thing we need to do is actually give it a script to move forward. So in our players scripts folder, let's create a new C# script and we're going to call it move forward and open it up in the editor so we can actually get the sphere to move forward. So with the new script open, Again, I'm going to delete the code that I need at the moment and replace it with the pre-generated code I had previously. It's quite a simple script just to move a game object forward in the consistent direction. So we have a Rigidbody, so we can actually affect it, basic speed that we wanted to move forward. In the start, we just reference the Rigidbody of the actual character, and we set a basic speed of 10 meters per second. And in the update, it's just a Rigidbody velocity move at a consistent speed. In the editor at the moment, for the sphere object, what we need to do is select that and grab the move forward script and drag it onto the actual sphere itself, so that it can actually be interpreted. We need to add a Rigidbody component, so we click on Add Component, select Rigidbody, and for this function to work, I want to disable the constraints, so I don't want any movement other than what I'm actually giving at the moment, and I don't want to use gravity at this moment in time. The other script that we need to add onto the sphere in order for it to process the track correctly is the return to port tag, which would, as it proceeds down the track, will hit the trigger and then tell each platform piece that it's no longer needed and will return back to the port. So if you were to press play at this moment in time, the sphere should be moving down the track, and it's currently not. Okay, I see my problem. So what I've done is I've frozen my positions, only should have frozen the rotation. I don't want it to rotate, but I still do want it to move. And what I'm going to do as well is just move it down the track a little bit so that it is actually going to be on the track when it actually starts being created. So if we press play now, the sphere should arrive and it's running down the track as expected. Problem is we can't actually see what happens with it going forward. So just to test for the moment, let's get our main camera and just make it a child of the sphere so that it can actually just follow it along. We need to set the camera to a better location so we can actually see what's going on. So we would just select the main camera. In the bottom view here, you can see the actual sphere, and it's quite far away from the camera. So let's change the direction or the distance away from the sphere for the camera in the Z position to something like -4 to make it more viewable. So if we were to press play now, the sphere is moving down the track. The camera is following it as it goes forward. There are no player controls at the moment, so I can't move left or right. That is something we're going to be doing later on. As can be seen at the moment, nothing new is being created. It eventually will run out of track and it's not reusing any of the game objects. And what I remember is that I haven't actually put a trigger onto the prefabs that we created to actually signal that the sphere has passed through or completed using that piece of track and actually allowing it to send back into Levelmanager. So let's work on that now. We'll stop the play at the moment and we'll go to our prefab for level 1 folder and open up the level 1 easy. As you can see, it's opened up in the prefab environment and we can start editing from here. So the first thing we need to do is create an exit trigger on each track piece. So what you do is for the level 1 easy, create an empty object and let's call that exit trigger. And on there, we would need to add a box collider, something that can be collided with by the game object. As you can see, it's created this tiny little block in our scene at the moment. If we rotate around, we should be able to see it there. For now, we need to move it to the end of the track, so I'm going to keep the location that this x is 0. I'm going to change its height to be 1.8, and I'm going to change its size to be 5 on the x, 5 on the y, and keep the 1 there. And then the next thing we need to do is move it to the end of the track by changing its z position on the transform to be 7.6. As you can see, at the end of the track, there's now this trigger. As the player moves down the track, he'll run to the trigger and it will execute a script. So what we need to do is also enable the isTriggered script so that it knows that it's a trigger event and it will trigger a process that's going to be scripted. We also need to add in our object destroy script. So we add it on there, and that will send a trigger to the level manager when it gets passed through, and we've got a delay of 10 seconds to say 10 seconds after I've been triggered to delete everything from going from there. We need to repeat this process for all the other game objects. I'm going to pause while I just alter that quickly. So my prefab objects have now been modified to have the extra trigger enabled. So now if we click play, its VF should move down the track, and if all works out well, the platform pooling should work correctly. So as we progress, as you can see, is the active processes, transitional pieces, and the transitional piece should be the first ones to disappear. You see the first one disappeared, and the second one disappeared. And as you can see, it's now starting to deallocate and reallocate the track pieces in the level 1 is. So we go to the scene view and select one of the pieces. We can then also see that it's growing and keeping things in track. As you can see, it keeps adding on pieces going forward. And if you look at the end, you'll see the track pieces being removed from the game object. So now you're reusing game objects to run on, you're saving memory, and it's going to keep everything much cleaner going forward. Thank you very much for spending this time with me. I hope that I've been able to give some insight into the pooling system for creating track pieces for your endless runner going forward. In the next episode, I'm going to be adding in a character, so we can actually get a character into the scene, do some movements with left and right, up and down, jumping and sliding, and adding in the mobile controls. If you find the content helpful, please like, subscribe, send me any comments about how I can improve, and I'll see you in the next video.